2001.
Yes.
This would have been the future of Campus Crusade at University of Nebraska, right here.
I got to have dinner last night with Joanna and Ingrid. Joanna showed up on our campus. We were doing 1999, right? Is when you came. When Joanna showed up on our campus ministry, our team, she just infused, as you can imagine, just life and energy and just fun. And one of our best memories for Kelly and I was with Miss Georgiana, as my daughter would call her, sitting in our kitchen. We were eating pancakes together and just sitting and talking. And so it's just so much fun to get to. I'm going to introduce her, but just to see her again and to get to be a part of, just to witness how God's using her. And so I would like you guys, if you've been a part, I haven't been a part of the weekend, unfortunately, but I'm excited about this morning. But I would like to pray for this morning, and I'll turn over she's got her own mic, but I'll turn it over to her. Father, thank you for years of just your faithfulness. And I'm grateful to sit here with my friend and coworker and partner in ministry from all those years past, just to see how you have been at work in her life. Just to see her face and just the joy that she has to bring for each one of us, to hear of your goodness and your faithfulness in calling us, the way that you evidence your work in each one of us and what we do. And even this morning, as she shares just about how it is that we're formed in and through our work, I pray that we'll be ears to hear, and indeed we would continue to grow to know you through the lens of what Joanna has to share this morning. So teach us well. Thank you for being our good God, the one who's called us to be yours first and called us to do something in the world around us. And pray you'd equip us even in a more effective way this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Can we give Joanna a hand, a round of applause?
So fun to see you guys. To help me know where our starting point is in this conversation, I'm curious, just give me a show of hands if you were here either Friday or Saturday. So we have kind of a mix. Okay, good. So I'll make sure that I provide a little bit of a foundation for those of you who weren't here. So my name's Joanna Meyer. I come to Grace Chapel via relational connections from 1999 to 2005 when I lived in Lincoln, Nebraska. I worked with Crew at UNL, and Rick helped me in my early career as a young professional learn how to be an adult, and then we had the privilege of co-laboring together and serving students at the university. And since that time, I've had all kinds of roles in my life. I've worked in the corporate sector. I spent a number of years hustling and just being a freelancer and a contractor. I learned the freedom and the challenges of being self-employed and what that looks like. And for the last 8 years, I've worked with an organization called the Denver Institute for Faith and Work, which is a nonprofit in Denver, Colorado. It's part of a broader movement that's growing nationally and globally of people that are passionate about thinking about how God works through the daily work of his people. And you may think that sounds kind of niche-y, and to some degree it is, but it actually flows from this conviction that we serve a God whose gospel is big. The idea that when Christ came to earth, his death on the cross and resurrection redeems individual lives, but it actually is setting in motion a process of God redeeming the entire cosmos, which means that every corner of creation, every area of influence or form of daily work, from the work of parenting to the work of being president of the United States, can have implications for the kingdom. And as an organization, we're passionate about discipling Christians to see God and serve him in their daily work. And that really actually is, to me, is a significant discipleship gap because it takes a measure of creativity and discipleship to think deeply about how the gospel shapes what we do every day. And so over the course of the weekend, we talked on Friday night about why our work matters to God. If you were here yesterday for a conversation for women, we talked about why women's daily work, in whatever form it takes, is significant in the mission of God in the world. We have this expansive vision of God's call for women and an invitation for every woman to leverage her influence and giftedness for kingdom purposes in the world. And today, we're going to flip the equation. We're going to talk about why God matters for our work. Over the years, I have found that there's an opportunity for us to press more deeply into our relationship with God and see Him deepen our walk with Him and our maturity as Christians if we understand how to see God and experience Him in the hustle and bustle of our daily lives. And so we'll talk about that today, and hopefully it'll be fun and practical. I prefer an interactive conversation, so I'm going to ask you to offer me some feedback as we go along. So I would love to hear from you what your impressions are as you think about popular culture, what the purpose of work is, or what should be our motivation for work. Just shout it out, don't be shy. What is the purpose of work, or what should be our motivation to be working?
We should work so we don't have to work anymore.
Yes, we work anticipating retirement, right? We work to get a paycheck, right? Every 2 weeks. We work so that we can stay alive and get money for our jobs. What are other motivations for why we would work?
We work to give glory to God.
You were here Friday night, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. Gold star for you, my friend.
Thank you.
Other thoughts on why do we work? Yes, self-actualization. We gain identity, we gain pride, a sense of accomplishment through our daily work. Any other thoughts?
Pull our weight in society.
Yeah, pull our weight in society, that's a good one. Being productive as people. I think there are a lot of beautiful things that come through work, and to be honest, there are a lot of very, very jacked up things that come through work. I think about both the time that we spend there, like they estimate that an average person will spend about 90,000 hours of their life working. Isn't that a crazy thought? But also, if you are working outside the home, and when I'm talking about work, I want to acknowledge we're talking broadly. It could be anything from washing dishes and preparing a meal for your kid to, like I said, being president of the United States. But for today's conversation, I want to talk a little bit more about work outside the home, but realize that you're included. If you're a homemaker or a retiree, you're included in this conversation. But work is a place of great influence. Even if you're just entry level in your job, you still have significant resources that have been entrusted to you and influence. And so how we steward that matters. Also, you're spending a lot of your waking hours at work. And so understanding how God meets you in your work and being present before Him, it's an amazing opportunity to experience God more. And I think sometimes we'll think of our daily work transactionally. We see it as a way to have an influence spiritually on our coworkers, whether it's talking about Christ or leading a Bible study. But the reality is, if we serve a living God who's present with us in every moment of the day, that means God is actively at work in our lives in the context and the uniquenesses of our pressures and daily work. And so that's what we want to talk about, is like, how do we actually experience and understand what God can do in our inner lives through our work? So here's a quote from the theologian Paul Stevens that I really appreciate. He said, "In our daily work, we have a perfect opportunity to observe ourselves. It's where we discover the good and evil in ourselves, and we see our merits and our faults. This work by the sweat of our brow lays bare the image of our soul and unveils its real expression." So if there was one phrase that I would want you to take away from today, it would be the concept of living with God and for God in all of life. So we'll talk about what does it look like to live with Him and for Him in all of life. And I'll have 3 P's that help us understand how that plays out. The first is being aware of God's presence in our daily work and what it looks like to really be open to that. Simple practices that we can do in the context of our work. And then finally, pause, why pause is important in how we experience God. The first relates to presence. Oh, there we go. And it's the idea that we work with the master craftsman in his workshop. I want you to think about the concept of apprenticeship. If you were living in the Middle Ages and you were a young man trying to learn a trade, you could learn that work by becoming an apprentice. And often what that meant is that you would move into the workshop and potentially the household of a master craftsman. In exchange for your labor, you might receive room and board. You would be part of that family. You would learn the mastery of that craft by living with the master craftsman. If you're lucky, you might even marry the master's daughter. You get a little inside scoop there. And we think of the biblical meaning of the word disciple, it's a student or an apprentice, someone who learns by living with and working alongside the master. And when Christ invites us to follow him, to become his disciple, he's inviting us to be his apprentice. And that means doing life with him and learning from him in the context of our daily lives. So imagine if we block off that 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 if you're working an office-y job. If you don't see that as a place of apprenticeship, gosh, you're cutting yourself off from a killer opportunity to learn from the master craftsman. A passage of scripture that helps me understand this comes from Matthew 11. And this has been an interesting journey for me to understand this passage, because a lot of times when I read it previously, it spoke to a cycle of burnout and escape in my own life. I think especially during my campus ministry days, I was really prone to overwork, and so I would run hard, doing work that I thought mattered for the Lord. I'd get exhausted. I would read this passage of verses, I would escape and get rest, and then I would run back into my cycle of burnout. And I think as I've sat with this passage more, I've realized that Christ is inviting us to do the exact opposite. He's not inviting us to escape from work, but to experience work with him. So let's take a look at these verses in light of that. Matthew 11, 28 through 30 says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Take a look at what Christ is inviting us to. He's inviting us to be yoked to himself. We're invited to be yoked with Jesus and to experience life the way he intended it to be lived, before sin and brokenness changed the way we work. So in these verses, when he talks about you will find rest for your souls, he's not inviting us to escape, which is what I thought. I thought, I need to flee to have retreat, and that's where I'll experience rest for my soul. He is inviting us to find rest by doing work with him. You think about that agricultural implement of a yoke. It's two oxen being tied together and pulling together in the work of plowing that field. And so when Christ says, be yoked to me, it's in all of life. We will learn from the master oxen, the bigger ox. We will find rest from a teacher who's gentle and lowly in heart. Isn't that amazing to think that as we yoke ourselves with Christ, his burden is light. He has the he has the strength to carry it with us. I often joke and say, Jesus is always the bigger ox. And what a gift that is. But what a gift to think that by yoking ourselves to Christ, we experience rest in the midst of doing work, in the midst of plowing. And that's an invitation for us in our daily work. Whatever pressures we're facing, that we're yoked to Christ as a person that we're learning from, as the bigger ox who will be carrying the burden of our work. And that's where we find the rest. Pastor Tom Nelson has a beautiful way of describing this. He's a pastor in Kansas City and has thought deeply about what it looks like to be a Christian at work. And this is what he says. He says, when we enter the yoke of Christ, we press into God's design for our lives, and we learn from Jesus how he would live our lives if he were us. A vital part of our learning from Jesus, of our being yoked to him, is vocational faithfulness. I think this has been one of the most powerful concepts in my own life of learning what it looks like to be in a daily relationship with Christ, is that sense of being yoked with him and his presence and his strength at every moment of your day. So I want you to do a little exercise for me. Just humor me. Just close your eyes for a second. And I want you to picture yourself doing something typical for your work day. You might be washing dishes if you're a homemaker. You might be giving a presentation in front of a team of higher-ups at the office. You might be a teacher in the classroom, stepping in front of a room full of overactive, energized kids. What might it be like if Christ accompanied you? If he was at your shoulder, working with you, teaching you, offering you support, expressing his delight and patience with you? How would it change the way you experience your workday? Where would you most want Christ's guidance in your day? Okay, you can open your eyes. I just want to remind you that Jesus is always the bigger ox as we're plowing together. Like, the beauty and supremacy of Christ is that he's sufficient for whatever you face in your workday. And so to not realize that he is standing at your shoulder, pulling with you in the challenges that you face, is depriving us of an incredible opportunity to experience God in our lives. Dallas Willard always fascinates me. Is anybody a Dallas Willard fan? I think I first learned about him from you, Rick. In a lot of the writing that he did. One of the reasons that I am fascinated by him is that he was a philosophy professor at a secular university. He worked at the University of Southern California. So we often see Dallas as he's dead, but we think of him as a Christian author. But really, like, he was in the trenches of a very secular place, teaching what could be a very secular topic, philosophy. And yet that was an incredible place of Christian presence and influence for him. Let me read to you how he described the way that he experienced Christ in his work. He said, "The place of discipleship is wherever I am now. It's whatever I am now." Sorry, let me read that again. "The place of discipleship is wherever I am now. It's whatever I'm now doing now. When I go to work at USC and walk into class, that's my place of discipleship. That's the place where I am learning from Jesus how to do everything in the kingdom of God. That's why it's important for me to understand that Jesus is, in fact, the smartest man in my field. He's the smartest man in your field. It doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're running a bank or a mercantile company or a manufacturing plant or a government office or whatever it is, he is the smartest man on the job." Let me say that again. When you walk into your work, that's your place of discipleship. That's where you're learning from Jesus how to do everything in the kingdom of God. So that raises some questions of, like, how in the heck do we do that? So let me hear from you. We'll talk about that in a second, how do we do that? Practically speaking, how do you think it would make a difference to recognize God's presence with you as you work? How do you think it could help you? And feel free to shout it out. I'll share a little bit. Oh yeah, feel free, go ahead. Were you going to say something? I'll share my own. I struggle with anxiety and anger at work. You would think because I work for a Christian organization that real world emotions don't happen, but they do. And as I feel anxiety or when I want to be reactive in a meeting that isn't going my way, recognizing Christ's presence with me allows me to step back and pause and not react emotionally. So even though I work with Christian coworkers, I still really can exhibit some ungodly behavior in those moments. And so for me, being able to pause and breathe deeply, even in meetings, to literally picture Christ at my shoulder, it really changes the way that I react to my coworkers. Were you going to say something?
I think it just helps me see people's brokenness and be less maybe irritated or short with them, so it gives me more compassion to see them through God's eyes.
Other thoughts on practically how it would make a difference to see? Go ahead. I imagine if you're in a healthcare setting that you probably have moments where you think, wow, nothing in my training prepared me for this. I had a few moments in campus ministry where I sat with students that had really, really difficult life situations, and I thought, nothing in my training prepared me for this. And what a help to know that you don't have to have all the answers, that Christ, the God of the universe, the source of all wisdom, is physically, you're yoked to him in the context of your daily work. And so he's present to offer that wisdom and that strength. Any other thoughts on practically how it would make a difference to experience Christ in your work?
Yeah, I'll have this long do list, but the Holy Spirit will tell me what I should work on next. And it takes away a lot of anxiety and
Yeah.
also give wisdom on how to do it better.
Yeah.
If I listen to the Spirit tell me.
I love that. you were saying that the Holy Spirit gives you discernment regarding your to-do list and how to prioritize what you're working on. Sorry about that. Is anybody a fan of the Enneagram? I want to be careful because some people may really know it. I work with a bunch of people that are a personality type, the number 1, which means that they live with a strong internal sense of judgment every day of what's right and what's wrong. Are there any ones in the room? I'm not a 1, and I feel bad for ones. I'm really sorry, because the level of pressure that you feel of what's right and what's wrong, and the sense of kind of internal judgment that happens when you don't get it right or when life is not going the way that you think that it should, it's really strong. And so I think having an awareness of Christ's presence with you in work is that moment of very, very real grace as you look at your to-do list. One of the good things about work is that it introduces us to our own frailties, right? None of us are ever, well, maybe some of us, but most of us will never get our to-do list perfectly done in a day. And so we need grace for our frailty, and we'll experience God's grace in new ways when we experience the futility of work or the limitations of what we can get done. So those are a couple examples of what practically we can think of. And if you can think of that sense of your workplace being a place where you were apprenticed or yoked to Christ, that's a simple metaphor that you can explore for a lifetime as you go into your daily work. A second principle that can help us experience God and see our souls grow through work is the idea of having practical practices that can shape our daily experience at work. And we want to make this something you can tangibly do. But to get there, I want to build on a theme we were just talking about strong emotions or areas of idolatry we experience in our work. So I think the emotions will be easy to come by. So I want you to be brave and just shout it out. What is a strong emotion you might experience in the context of your job? Frustration. I love that. Anger, yeah, that's mine, anger. I was burning with rage the other day. Sadness. There can be deep disappointment in the context of our jobs. Any other emotions that you... What? Resentment. Boredom. Insecurity, jealousy. A lot of emotions, right? A lot of room for discipleship in the context of our job. Any other ones you'd add to the list? Satisfaction and joy. That feeling when you've done a wonderful job. Thanks for mentioning that, because we want to have some positive ones there. If you're a teacher, there can be that delight of seeing a kid who's struggling with math. Is Colby here? Yeah, we were talking about helping kids really thrive in learning math. There's a deep, deep satisfaction in that process. The list could go on. A challenge for you would be watching your life over the next week and just watching your emotional dial, catching those emotions as they come and go throughout the day, and presenting them to the Lord and saying, Lord, how is this an opportunity to experience you? I also want to talk about things that can become idols in our work. Every industry has some unique things that we would hold out as the vision of what a successful or a good life looks like. That can become an area of idolatry. There are certain things that we as individuals can worship. It could be a perfectly ordered schedule, could be a thing that you worship in the course of your day. It's what makes you feel right with the world, or if it gets thrown out of whack, it's the thing that really ruins your day. Other examples of idolatry, I was thinking industry-specific things, personal things that we would worship. I think cultural things that are of value. As you roll into work in a certain kind of car, that could be your marker of success. Let's do some brainstorming together. As you think about things related to our daily work that can become an idol, what comes to mind?
Greed for money and competition with other coworkers.
Yep. Promotions can be an area of idolatry. You could spend your days thinking, in 3 years, I will be a partner at my law firm. And that could be an area of idolatry. Yeah. Really, any goal can be something that can become a worshipful goal. There's a fine line between deep commitment and determination and idolatry. Anything else that you would see as an idol in our work? Okay, tell me more. I love that you said that. Tell me more. Your phone. Security. You know how vulnerable you feel if you go to the grocery store without your phone? What if I have an accident and I can't call for help? That's what I think. As you think biblically about what an idol was, I think about the Old Testament. It was anything that stood in place of God. It was a thing that provided a place that you look to for security and confidence, that I will worship this and life will turn out okay. It was a substitute. It was a lot easier often because it's more defined as a golden calf instead of the mysteries of a wild and powerful God. Anything that substitutes for God for our sense of love, security, confidence in our own salvation, it can become an idol at work. And so when we think about practices through which God can shape our soul at work, it's practices that will engage the emotions and the idols that daily work presents in our lives. I should say, if you're a homemaker, Instagram presents you with idols every day that you can worship, of a home that looks a certain way, or meals that are presented. You find security in the healthiness of the meals that you prepare for your kids. There are plenty of opportunities to do that. So the place that we can meet God and that God shapes us is providing practices that directly address this and turn our hearts back to Him, and in a sanctification process, especially with those emotions, for how we experience God. And so I want to present 3 examples of practices that we can do to begin to turn back to God and help Him deal with these experiences and idols. The first is, oh my goodness, how did we get it so smushed up? I can worship the beauty of a PowerPoint slide, or I can trust that God has grace for me and you have grace for me in the space of like a poorly formatted slide. But the principle I want to introduce you to is the idea of lament. You may have heard that word in biblical terms. It may not be new to you. But let's talk about what lament looks like as it meets you in your daily work. So I love what the author Steve Garber has to say. He says, can you fully know the world and truly love it? Think about your job, if you happen to be really enjoying it. To love anything, like C.S. Lewis said, is to really have your heart broken. And so in the context of our daily work, if we're bringing our best selves to the job, like we talked about on Friday night, trusting that work can be good, a place that we participate with God in the stewardship and development of the world, our hearts are going to get broken because we live in a fallen world. And so how we deal with the conflicting emotions we experience about work matters. I shared Friday night that I got fired a few years ago. I don't look like the type of person that gets fired, right? How limited is my understanding of my own sinfulness, the idolatry of myself and my own goodness, is that I'm not the kind of person that gets fired, but I did. I got fired. Do you think I felt some lament around that? Yeah. I'm guessing that there are people in the pews today that have been let go from a job that you really cared about, or were let go under unjust circumstances, or not in a way that felt good to you. Other sources of lament might be a project that you were passionate about that suddenly lacked funding. You did incredible, good work, and suddenly the organization's support for it just dried up and you no longer can do that good work. Or maybe your industry has changed and the work that you have spent a lifetime apprenticing in and becoming a master at, there's no longer gainful employment down that line of work. My slide has been fixed. You guys are awesome. Thank you. It's the renewal of all things. Faith and work is filled with great jokes, right? So to truly know and live in the world and love it means our hearts are going to get broken as we encounter the futility and fallenness of life. So how we respond to those emotions, especially as it relates to work, is critical. And so areas of lament and how we can do that start with asking, how are you really feeling? That's a hard question, to be honest. I may make a joke about being fired because a few years have passed and I'm successful in my job now, but you want to talk about shame, what it felt like to look at peers who had helped me land that job and say, I got fired. There was a lot of shame for that. So I think it starts with saying, how are you really feeling? And then we follow the biblical model of a place where we can cry out to God. That's one thing I love about the Psalms is that they are super messy. I think sometimes in our faith circles, we feel like it's okay to be honest if, big asterisk, if we can quickly move to a sanitized version of how we experience those emotions. Like, it's okay to be a little messed up if you can show how you're on the road to recovery. And one thing I appreciate about the Psalms is that the psalmists just lay it all out there. That for a season, we'll just say it's a season, you really can have full honesty and expression of the lament or the brokenness that you're experiencing. The second is that we can turn to God for help. We can beg for God's renewal and intervention. You don't have to tidy it up, but you can throw yourself in the hands of a loving God. And then I think a final step, and I would encourage you not to rush there too fast, but in the goodness of the Lord, trusting Him, eventually turning Him to trust and praise, giving both the brokenness that we feel and a faithful response to Him. I struggle with that last piece, you guys. I think of areas of brokenness in my own life. I think I want to encourage authenticity, and yes, we do give it back to the Lord. That's the critical endpoint in lament, but I think sometimes we hurry to that so quickly. 5 Psalms you may want, or 6 that you may want to write down that can just model what lament looks like. Psalms 12 and 13, 22, 44, 54, and 68. You can just sit with them. And what beauty to know that in the midst of whatever is happening at work, God can meet us in this way. A second tool, and this is one that's a little bit more positive after I started on downer, is the idea of ways that we can meet God through prayer in our daily work. Have you ever done breath prayers? Have you ever heard of the concept of breath prayers? I see someone over here who has. Yeah. Breath prayers are great. It's the idea that we can experience prayer with God just with the rhythm of our breathing. What I love about this is when I'm in a meeting and the anxiety is cranking like it was for me last week, just so you know like how real the anxiety is for me sometimes at work, is that in that moment I don't have to retreat out of the room or even close my eyes. I can be in a prayerful posture before the Lord simply with the rhythm of my breathing. And that's what a breath prayer is. I've given you a few examples, but you can make your own. You could split any verse that is meaningful to you in half and choose to breathe in and out and pray it. So a few examples of breath prayer is, in an inhale, you would say, "The Lord is my shepherd." It's like yoga, but better. "I shall not want," as you exhale. You could say, "Be still and know that," and in your inhale, "that I am God." I love this last one. You could say, well, "Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on me, a sinner," is one of the classics, of Christian history. But I like the last one. It comes from Psalm 90. "May your favor rest on me. Establish the work of my hands." I've been pushing for some funding for an initiative I'm leading, and this breath prayer has been particularly meaningful in budget meetings, where I know that I can trust the Lord with that and say, if the Lord wants this to happen, He'll provide for what I need. But by praying, "May your favor rest on me, establish the work of my hands," it helps me just calm down in those moments and begin to see Him. Are you beginning to see how God can be shaping you and meeting you in everyday work? Breath prayers are the best. I live in Colorado, and so I see a lot of people go to yoga, and I've even gone to yoga. But I think breath prayers are a wonderful complement to that. Another example of how God can meet us through prayer is something called the prayer of EXAMEN. Has anybody ever done a prayer of EXAMEN? We have. There we go. Thank you, guys. We should have a printout for you. I don't know if Joanna's around. Do we have copies of the prayer of EXAMEN? Oh, you got it. This is particularly appealing to my coworkers that are ones, for all the ones in the room, because it allows you to reflect on your day and examine and see how it's going. It really is, the prayer of examine is a structured format that allows you to just think through what has happened throughout your workday. So it's great to do at the end of the day if you have 10 minutes. The copy of the prayer of examine that I've given you is drawn from some resources from Fuller Seminary. I have a few extra copies if anybody needs them. But here's the concept, is at the end of the day, part of our journey of discipleship is just sitting before the Lord and talking to Him about what we've experienced at work. And so the prayer of the examine starts with acknowledging God's presence, inviting Him to be part of your day. I love what this vision from Fuller Seminary offers in Psalm 139. It talks about, where can I get away from your spirit? Where could I go to escape your presence? If I went up to heaven, you would be there. If I went down to the grave, you would be there too. It's just acknowledging God's presence in all things. It slows you down to have a period of giving thanks. This is something I don't do enough in my work, of acknowledging in the very small things, how did I see God show up in the day? What are the things that I could be thankful for? If you struggle with the spirit of discontent, a daily practice of thankfulness, even in just simple ways like this prayer, can really turn the ship on how you feel about that. The third step is a place of reviewing the day. Imagine if you just walked through your workday, just graciously, we could talk about, as we talk about being yoked to Christ in the relationship of an apprentice, the idea of just imagine Christ with you throughout the day, talking to Him about what you experienced moment by moment, what was going on. Where did you experience God? What were moments in which you struggled to have confidence and peace, or you struggled to display the fruits of the Spirit in your daily work? The fourth step is just confession. We confess every Sunday, but in a prayer of examine, you have the freedom to just share your shortcomings with the Lord. The beauty of that is that it's like immediate feedback. You just can bring it to the Lord and say, Lord, this is what happened today. These were my limitations. This is how I got angry or anxious in that meeting. And be met with His grace in that. I love the words from Psalm 51 about create in me a clean heart and put a new and right spirit within me. I love how that can reframe your day so that when you go back into work tomorrow, you have a new perspective, a new reframe on how to approach it. And the final step is forward-looking, of just acknowledging that the Creator of the universe is present with you and preparing you for tomorrow. I have used the prayer of examine sporadically, but I have watched coworkers that do it every day. They have a small notebook by their bed, and they just take 10 minutes at the end of the day, just reflect and reframe for the next day. And I've seen it be transformational in their lives.
Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah. So that would be a tool for you as you think about experiencing God in your work, is allowing yourself to walk through your day in the presence of the Lord. So a final tool, as I think about God shaping our souls through work, is something you guys know a lot about because you've done it in Sunday school. So I have a few thoughts, but maybe you can teach me a little bit too, because I know you've talked about the idea of Sabbath. One of the things that's so important about experiencing God in our daily work is realizing that work and rest go hand in hand. Good work flows from good rest. And so Sabbath, as we think about a theology of work, Sabbath is a vital component of that. Sabbath is not an escape from work, it's a complement and goes hand in hand with God, what God has given us. And I think that's a different philosophy. I'd like to hear from you guys, because I know you did a 4-week class on Sabbath. What has practicing the Sabbath looked like for those of you that are engaging a little bit more? We'll talk about some ideas I have in a second, but I'd love to hear, what are you doing and how is it working? Mona.
When you disconnect from social media and you bless your children and you light candles and you reflect on the blessings that God has already blessed you with, it takes time to do that. I mean, I don't answer my phone. I don't work anything. I don't even do laundry. If I haven't done it by Thursday night,
Really?
forget it. Because when the sun goes down on Friday, it's just my way of building up to be in the presence of the Lord so that everything that I do is focused on the rest that He promised me. And by keeping the Sabbath and blessing it and making it holy, it allows me to be in that space where God can fill my cup and relieve me of all the things that have not been so great during the week. But then I can rejoice in the fact that He is always with me, and then that He has blessed me with the things that I already have.
Go, Mona. Could you hear Mona pretty well? Mona's voice projects better than average, but you have an intentional practice of Sabbath. Other thoughts on how you are personally doing Sabbath for those of you that are trying to do it a little bit more? What are you experimenting with? Yeah.
I've been amazed from just the lighting of the candles. It creates this peaceful glow in the room that just kind of causes me to focus and unwind and be in that moment of making that our priority is that time of pulling away.
Yeah, it's awesome. The practice of setting aside a starting point through the lighting of the candles can do that. Any other thoughts on how Sabbath's working for you?
I thought it was really interesting to think about, like, that the whole week is in preparation of the Sabbath. And even the first week, the challenge to get 8 to 9 hours of sleep every night so that you're not burnt out and exhausted psychotically, so that you can actually enjoy the Sabbath has been just, yeah, it's been really interesting.
A whole week of preparation leading up to it. The thought of getting 8 to 9 hours of sleep nightly would change my life. That's not a reality. I'm in midlife. Has anybody hit midlife sleeplessness? I'm looking at the women in the room. It bites. It's terrible. It's really terrible. Here's a few thoughts specifically on how it relates to our working lives. Tim Keller has this lovely thought about it. He says, the Sabbath is not about restoring the diminished, is about restoring the diminished. It's about replenishing the drained. It's about repairing the broken. It's not just a day off. So there's a real intentionality and purpose behind why we do Sabbath. I love in the 10 Commandments that it's not a must. I mean, it's a must to do because it's a commandment, but it's a get to do in my own mind. I think about people that lived in slavery and what it would have been like after 400 years of slavery for the Egyptians to be told, you have a day where you don't have to work. You know, think about the generations of people that had never had the freedom of rest, and that God gives that to us. When we think about good work, we see Genesis, where work and rest go hand in hand. Our work is dependent on having cycles of rest in our lives. Here's a few things that I do when it comes to Sabbath, and I think some of you have a much more sophisticated interpretation through the marking of the candles. But the basics, especially in a culture where you're expected to be on 24/7, for me, it starts with advanced planning. I have to know that there's 24 hours on my calendar when I'm not going to be doing any work. That may take coaching with your employer. I feel like I'm lucky because I work for a Christian organization, and so on our team we identify, are you going to take Saturday or Sunday as your Sabbath? Some of us have very busy schedules at church, and so we just say that's not a day of rest for me. And so for me, Saturday is my Sabbath. But it may take coaching. This is one thing I've appreciated with Tim Keller, is that as you think about him speaking to Manhattanites who are in jobs where their employers would expect them to be tied to their phones 24/7, it may take some conversations with an employer about when you'll be available. And that can be hard. I mean, having a Sabbath is really, really countercultural for a culture prone to overwork. Another tool is intentionally involving relational engagement through your day. I'd be curious to know if you guys talked about what it's like to have young kids in your conversation about Sabbath. Yeah, I think it's really hard to expect like a full 24 hours of rest. It looks different, but I think the spirit of Sabbath can be translated into life with young kids. But are you intentionally involving relationships? The idea of thoughtfully limiting technology. This is the best thing I've ever done, is to take a day where I just am not glued to my phone and not thinking about pressures. It's also the hardest thing to do. It's the first thing because of the phone in my pocket. Whoever mentioned the phone. It's the first thing to go when I think about truly having rest. Actively pursuing joy. This is also hard for me. I can just fill my life with a lot of time wasters and not say, I'm actively doing something that allows my Sabbath day to be joyful. We talked about doing something, this is Tim Keller, he talks about doing something avocational, which means the opposite of what you do in your daily work. And that actually is helpful when we think about Sabbath as it relates to work, is are you truly getting away and rebuilding your life with things that, like if work unbalances you because you're spending 40 hours at a computer screen thinking about data and numbers, what would be the opposite that would help kind of counterbalance your life, but actively pursuing something unlike that? For me, it's most likely something that's creative and something where I'm productive with my hands is what is avocational for me. And then just that sense of what feels restorational. What do you think it would cost you to make Sabbath more of a habit in your daily life? What do you think are the primary objections as you think about being able to live this way? What hurdles would you have to overcome to actually do it? Say it again? It would be an idol or two that would cost you. Yeah, it would cost you a couple idols. I think it's countercultural if you have kids. I think about you, Jesse, having 4 kids who have active lifestyles. You guys, are your kids in youth sports?
Yeah, but
that's hard.
moderated.
Yeah. And I want to be real careful. I don't want to sound judgy, but I think that's part of Sabbath is figuring out how in the world do we have like engaged, active kids in culture that just over-programs them. What does that mean for a Sabbath practice? Other hurdles that you would have to come through to get?
You have to rethink about time.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to reprioritize time.
Yeah. I often joke that I need a housewife. I think anybody that's working full-time needs help getting like the daily work of our homes done. Like there's a lot of pressure. So trying to figure out how I get it all done on the weekend if I'm going to plan for a calmer day is really, really tough. Any other obstacles or hurdles? Say it again. Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, does anybody have a job where you might be expected to be available on the weekends, like checking an email or responding? I think about your job as running a healthcare network, and I'm sure that the phone rings on the weekend. Do you do Sabbath, and what does it look like to create space for yourself? Oh, no, I was asking you, sorry. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, well, it's not perfect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But we started doing the Sabbath with our children many, many years ago, and just said, here are the things we get to do. We get to go to church, we get to rest, we get to watch movies or play games, and we get to eat junk food. And that were things that kind of attracted everybody to the same things, and I think that was what made it work for us, even if it wasn't always perfect.
Yeah.
Were the things that we got to do.
I love that. Thanks for humoring me, because I put you on the spot totally, so thank you. But I know the nature of your job, or a little bit, and I thought, I bet that your phone rings on the weekends, and it would be really hard to figure out, how do I manage that? And yeah. You also set the tone for your employees. If you're in a position of leadership, you can create a spirit of, even if people aren't practicing the Sabbath, you can mentally create a spirit of Sabbath for the people that you lead. I mean, just think about that. Like, if you're in a position of leadership and authority, you set the tone and the culture for your organization. So are you creating the kind of atmosphere where your employees can experience true rest? Any other thoughts on how you might obstacles that you might face in what it looks like to be a practice of the Sabbath?
Right? Like, this actually is kind of similar to what you said about people being disappointed. But
Yeah.
it feels very indulgent to
I think it is. I think it is.
that's the point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just one more thought, I think it goes back to other things that you've already said about work isn't an evil, it's a good.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we get interrupted on the weekends with work, and that's okay as long as we have the right mentality about what we get to do, even when we're interrupted.
Yeah. I don't think Sabbath, I mean, you could have a rigid approach to practicing the Sabbath, or you can make it a way of life where you're like, I'm doing my best to honor this spirit of like rest as a complement to work. If work is good, then it's okay.
Sabbath could be an idol.
Yes, if you're rigid about it, Sabbath could be an idol. But it is a joy. I often think about the Israelites after 400 years of slavery that God said, you get a day off. Like, I want this. This is my gift to you. You get to enjoy it. And how strange that must have felt to them. That is an opportunity for us to break our slavery to work and figure out what it looks like to rest. Okay, so I would love to give you a final blessing. This is the last word you'll hear from me on Faith and Work this weekend. Can you believe it? But we're not done. I feel like we're just planting seeds for a journey of discipleship for you around your daily work. Why don't you close your eyes and put out your hands if you would. And I'll just offer you this blessing from 2 Thessalonians as it's translated in the message. So friends, take a firm stand, feet on the ground and head high. Keep a tight grip on what you were taught. May Jesus himself and God our Father, who reached out in love and surprised you with gifts of unending help and confidence, put a fresh heart in you, invigorate your work, and enliven your speech. Amen. Thanks for the privilege of being with you this weekend. It's just been such a gift. I'm gonna have to keep coming back to Lincoln. It'll have to be like an annual pilgrimage to hang out with you guys.